Hi there. In this video, we are going to talk about the 5 stages of shadow integration. My name is Christopher, and my coaching business is Humble Fox Consultations, and let's get rolling right into it. So I pulled from a couple of different sources, mainly Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, which is Jung's autobiography, Jung's Map of the Soul by Murray Stein, and a little book on the human shadow by Robert Bly, which isn't a very known book, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in checking out more on shadow work. And if you like, I have included the links to these books in the description down below as well for easy access. So I wanted to start this off with a little quotation by Robert Bly. If any help was going to arrive to lift me out of my misery, it would come from the dark side of my personality. Robert Bly, and that's in his book as well. I think this quote is extremely powerful because it shows that typically what we're looking for when it comes to alleviation from maybe depression, anxiety, misery actually comes from our shadow, comes from these parts of ourselves that maybe we don't want to access. And maybe these parts of ourselves are actually creating symptoms so that we can take time from our busy lives to actually go inward and try and find out what is needed and what's actually going on. Now, before we dive into this, I just want to take a moment to honor and respect the shadow because the shadow is very real. And the shadow is always listening. It's in the unconscious and it's always present. And I just want to take a moment to respect that we're talking very rational and structural terms for something that is by its very nature irrational and doesn't really adhere to structure. And so with that paradox, let's begin. So we're going to be talking about this aspect of the psyche right here, which is a part of Carl Jung's structure of the psyche. I've done a video on this entire structure if you want to check that out as well. But today we're going to be focusing just on the shadow and what it means to integrate the shadow into the rest of the psyche. What is the shadow? I also did an entire video on the shadow itself, but basically to simplify it, and this is a gross oversimplification, is that the shadow is the aspects of our personality that have been deemed unacceptable, unlovable, undesirable, etc. They're parts of our personality that have been split off and repressed into our unconscious. And this typically happens very early on in childhood, in relationships with our caregivers, with society, with authorities like teachers. There are certain parts of ourselves that we learn that are not acceptable to others. And so in order to be loved, which is a natural human survival mechanism, we split off parts of our personality in order to receive love and admiration. And at the detriment of doing so, those parts may later on need us to reintegrate those aspects. So what qualities end up in the shadow? Typically, hatred, fear, anger, greed, jealousy, sexuality, selfishness, and then love for the self. Typically, if we find that it's very easy for us to hate on ourselves or to be very difficult on ourselves or hard on ourselves, then our gentleness for ourselves, our love for ourselves, our compassion might be in the shadow, which means that our love and compassion for others might also be in the shadow as well. So acknowledging that the shadow is not only evil or bad aspects, the shadow encompasses just any aspect of our personality that was split off and left behind. So we're going to be talking about 5 stages of shadow integration. I wanted to add this little comic here because I think that it just kind of does a good job summing this up. We have met the enemy and he is us, which is exactly what the shadow is. Any evil that we project onto the external world is actually our own inherent sense of evil that lives inside of us. It's our own unintegrated aspect of evil. So the 5 stages, and we're going to dive into each of these as well as recognition and awareness. Stage 2 is acceptance and acknowledgement. 3 is exploration, understanding. 4 is integration and transformation. And 5 is maintenance and continual growth. So with that, I wanted to provide a quote by Carl Jung here to acknowledge if you're still wondering whether or not you have a shadow. This comes from Carl Jung, who's one of the greatest thinkers of the 18th, from the 1800s and 1900s. And he says, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. So basically what that means is the less we know about our shadow, the darker it's going to be. So beginning to acknowledge it, which leads us into our first stage, recognition and awareness. So this is acknowledging that the shadow is real aspect of the human psyche and that we ourselves carry aspects about ourselves that we may not find desirable. So we acknowledge the parts of the psyche that have been suppressed or disowned. often due to societal conditioning or personal trauma. This also comes from complex PTSD or early sort of developmental trauma that occurs not necessarily through one incident, but over a time of repetition of different parts of ourselves that are accepted and not accepted in the relationships that we have with our caregivers. So how can we begin to see the shadow? I wanted to also include some practicalness with this theory as well, because I think that theory without practicality is it's just theory, right? And we can talk about stuff all day, but I think taking action is really what brings about change. So how can we begin to see the shadow? So the easiest way to start seeing the shadow is to start recognizing judgment and idealization. So judgment is a word you may know. Judgment is when we look at something and we place sort of a hierarchical observation upon it. But when it comes to judging others, typically we may judge others for personality flaws or traits about them or ways that they act or whatever it may be inside of themselves. Now, idealization is the other side of that. And idealization typically occurs when we see someone and we tend to inflate them, or we see somebody as a god, or we put them on a pedestal, or we see that they can't do any wrong, or we just only see the good in them. And that, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes we just see really high quality aspects and virtues in somebody else that maybe we would like to have. And the thing about this in our work is that with judgment and with idealization is that whenever we judge or idealize, then we can look down at ourselves and recognize that what we're doing is we are judging or idealizing those very parts of ourselves. So if we judge somebody, what we're doing is we're projecting our own internal judgment onto someone else. Same thing with idealization, that if we also see a very good quality that we admire in other people, then we can also look down and see that we have that same quality, and chances are that we haven't owned that part of ourselves yet. So one super easy way to start doing shadow work is just to start recognizing when we judge and when we idealize. Another good way is to start recognizing when you or when other people start saying things like something came over me, or that's not who I really am. Perhaps you've had an experience where somebody's gotten extremely angry, or maybe you've gotten extremely angry, and later on that person comes back to apologize to you for their anger. They're just like, I'm usually not like that. I don't know what came over me. That's not really me. Now, what they're basically saying is that they have a shadow split, that there is an aspect of their shadow that comes out at times. Maybe this has happened to you as well. If you've recognized it's like, oh my gosh, this doesn't feel like me. This isn't who I really am. Well, chances are that that's your shadow that's coming online in those moments and is enacting anger or hatred or whatever it may be in those moments. Because the thing about the shadow is just because we've repressed it doesn't mean it's still not going to express itself. It'll find ways to express itself, and typically it either comes through some sort of volcanic explosion, but it may also come through these subtle coercive sort of ways of manipulating others as well. So self-talk, whenever I hear somebody say that they should do something, immediately I kind of start thinking about shame and the shadow. And I started asking myself, where did that come from? Where did that idea of having that I should be doing something in particular come from? Who taught you that? Where did that originally come from? I think that it's always important to start challenging that self-talk. And so we can start seeing a little bit of that self-talk come up as maybe some parts of the shadow. And then dream work. Dream work is a fantastic way to start working with the shadow. If you want to get rolling with that, all you have to do is every time you have a dream, wake up the next morning and just start writing your dreams down, start connecting with them, and then perhaps take them to a professional who knows how to interpret or work with dreams, and start working with those dreams. And I want to include this as well. This is from Carl Jung. So a man who is unconscious of himself acts in a blind, instinctive way and is in addition fooled by all the illusions that arise when he sees everything that he is not conscious of in himself coming to meet him from outside his projections upon his neighbor. So basically Carl Jung is acknowledging that we project those internal dynamics that are happening onto our neighbors, onto people around us. So if we start judging people for how they look, how they're acting, then we can start recognizing that perhaps we're judging ourselves for those very same things. Now, step two, or stage two, is the acceptance and acknowledgement. So this is the aspect of forgiving, accepting, appreciating, owning, and finding the love for our disowned aspects. So this is where we work on accepting and acknowledging the shadow aspects without judgment or condemnation. So in terms of practical actions, when we start judging something, what we can do is we can start to appreciate that. And I learned this from Ram Dass, is that every time he makes a judgment, what he does, whether it's about the world or himself or other people, is he in turn flips it around and he seeks for a way to appreciate what it is that he is judging. You can also do some inner child work. There's a 12-step group known as ACA that does an awesome job doing some inner child work and family of origin work. You can also find therapists or specialists who work on inner child work. Internal family systems is a great way to start working through some of this as well, to start understanding maybe what parts of ourselves were not allowed when we were children. Loving kindness meditation, metta, sending love to ourselves, sending love to those around us. There are a lot of YouTube videos you can search for to start doing some loving kindness meditations and really start tapping into and learning how to appreciate and love ourselves. And then some great ways also are ecstatic dance, art, and creative libido. So ecstatic dance is a form of dance where you basically just go, nobody's really talking to each other, and you just go and dance. And typically these dances are done sober. And it's a way for you to start learning how to dance and let these parts of yourself show that maybe you weren't allowed to show as a young child. And I've been to several ecstatic dances now, and I'm not someone who originally thought of themselves as a dancer or someone, and it really is difficult for me to dance in front of other people, but it's such a healing act and way of just learning how to move my body in different ways and allowing different energies to move through me. You can find ecstatic dances by just searching through an app like Meetup or Googling ecstatic dances in your area and seeing if there's anything around. Art is an awesome way to start integrating your shadow, allowing these unconscious aspects to receive voices, because sometimes these early aspects happen before our ability to speak. So they need a different form of integration, perhaps through art. This idea of creative libido is allowing these voices to speak, to come through you, to be a channel for the voiceless in a way. Robert Bly over here says, every part of our personality that we do not love will become hostile to us. And he also acknowledges that not only will it become hostile to us, but then it regresses as well. So every part that we don't use inside of our psyche actually regresses into an earlier stage and will become more primal and aggressive and hostile, as Robert Bly says. So stage 3 is the exploration and understanding. So here is where we are going to explore the roots and triggers of our shadow. And typically these are coming from childhood experiences, ages for us 0 to 10, which is pretty significant, acknowledging that ages 0 to 10 kind of is the foundation for how we view the world and sort of sets up our base of reality for the rest of our lives. And also just cultural conditioning in general and how these aspects formulate our unique shadow. So this could look like doing some inner dialogue exercises. Carl Jung had a practice called active imagination, where he would journal back and forth and get into a meditative state and journal back and forth between different parts of his psyche. You could start asking your shadow and start writing to your shadow and asking questions, and then writing and seeing how the shadow responds. You can get in therapy or some kind of counseling with a specialist who knows how to work with these modalities. And then you can participate in shadow work or workshops in community, and just acknowledging that we do heal in community. We heal together, so that just know that all of this doesn't have to be done on your own. And if you do feel that it all has to be done on your own, maybe your sense of dependency may be in the shadow. So integration and transformation. So here's where we integrate the shadow aspects into our daily lives. So we integrate the split into our lives, not changing who we are around others. So that's a great way to tell how far we've come on our shadow integration path, is do we change who we are around other people? And if so, I mean, everybody does this to a certain extent. We're humans. We're not infallible. We are completely capable of making mistakes, but we can start to see how much we start shifting and changing when we're in different friend groups, different compartmentalizations around other people. And once again, I'll acknowledge that compartmentalization in itself isn't bad. It's a common defense mechanism and it helps the psyche. But the more we can integrate who we are, the less we change around different people, the less we start molding and shifting ourselves to adapt to those around us. So how can we do this? Well, a great way to do this is to create rituals or ceremonies to mark integration and change. Something you can do is literally draw a line in the sand, perhaps read a statement to the world about who you were before and who you are after you walk across this line, and then walk across the line and make a metaphorical and a literal crossing of a line. It's an awesome ritual that I've partaken in that has helped me to break free from addiction, and also some other shadow aspects as well. Creating ritual in the morning can also help to reintegrate these aspects. So every day you're connecting with these energies, and it isn't something that just happens once and then you forget about forever. It's a process of consciously bringing these energies back into our life day to day. And then we can transform our shadow energy into constructive outlets. So basically creating a life that we want to create, starting to create lives filled with purpose and meaning, and creating beauty in the world, and adding to the collective, and helping others where we can. These are ways that we can start transforming these shadow energies to actually be of use and service to ourselves and the world around us. And then we also have the maintenance and continual growth. So this is where we just maintain awareness of our shadow, and we are actively working so that we don't regress into unconscious patterns, because just because we are aware of something doesn't mean that it doesn't have the potential to then go back into the shadow. So recognizing and honoring that shadow integration is an ongoing process that requires continual attention and self-reflection. So I want to leave you off with this little quotation by Carl Jung, that the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. So to me, that acknowledges, and it shows the purpose why even do shadow work in the first place. Because at times I've noticed in my own work that it becomes difficult to constantly be opening up wounds and doing shadow work. But the reason that we do this is because if we continue to work through these very difficult and archaic emotions, and primal energies, then, like Carl Jung says, if overcome, then there's a sense of calm and serenity that comes afterwards, that when we've worked through some very deep shadow aspects and very deep emotional states of our own, then the external world around us doesn't seem to have as big of an effect on us as it did before. And if you think about these energies, the shadow Carl Jung talks about typically has an energetic aspect to it, an emotional aspect to it, that these emotions get locked in our body. And when we're not consciously aware of these emotions, then the external world has a very easy chance of triggering those emotions, and we just get agitated very easily. But when we can start working through our emotional states, then the external world doesn't have that same ability to hit us with an overwhelming experience. Now, granted, we're human and those experiences are going to happen, but just acknowledging that doing shadow work is a great way to start integrating and bringing a sense of calmness and serenity to your life, and really sort of bringing a sense of equanimity and an ability to not change and shift and alter based off of external circumstances. So if you would like help with any of this, I work with shadow work, and if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can click the link below and schedule a consultation. I also specialize in doing dream work as well, so if that's something you're interested in, you can schedule a call below and we can get working on that. If you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing, I do spend quite a bit of time making these presentations just for you, for your enjoyment. So it would really help this video to get into YouTube's algorithm. Other than that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.